Hello and welcome to Udo Experience. My name is Jigar. I'm a software engineering manager at Udo Americas. Today's topic of our talk is going to be deploying and scaling Udo server, and we'll be talking about outset to go live. That means all the way from beginning. What are the different options that you have to deploy Udo, and then end up with a live system. And when you're ending up the live system, what are the different things that you should be worried about? That's what we're going to talk about. During talk, if you have any questions, feel free to leave your questions into the chat. I'll be more than happy to answer. I'll be more than happy to answer these questions at the end. So let's get started. First, first advice that give you is keep your deployment simple, safe, and secure. When I say simple, your deployment should be easily accessible, or if you want to grant an access to someone, you should be able to grant access to someone very easily. Remember, systems have they break at any time. Basically, there is no set time that it will break on Monday morning, or when you are in the office it may break any point in time. So things do happen, and when things do happen you have to be really prepared, and you should be able to access your system easily, or you should be able to grant access to the responsible very easily. So everyone should be able to access the system easily, and you should be able to grant access, easy access. Of course, when you are talking about the simplicity, you also have to worry about the safety and security of the server. You are running, remember, you're running entire system, entire organization data on one system. And if something goes wrong, that means, let's say there was a security breach or there was some sort of security problem, then you have to really think about what happened, and is my data secured, or there wasn't anything stolen. Things, when I said stolen, I'm talking about the data, system data, right? So you have to be really prepared, and you have to set up a system in a simple and secure way, because you do not want to risk your entire organization uh, data by doing a wrong setup. So that's why keeping your setup simple, safe, and secure is the most important thing that you need to worry about when you're deploying Udo. Now, when you're deploying Udo, you have four different options that always you can choose from. One is online. Online is basically easiest way to get Udo. That is, you can go to udo.com/start or udo.com/trial, and you can start your own trial, and you can start using Udo. But in this case, Udo is already hosted and it is already optimized for you by Udo, so you don't have to worry about the deployment. That's not what we are going to talk about. Package installer. Usually, oftentimes, this is under this are basically misread. Package installer are for the trying out Udo. They are not for the production, so do not use package installer for the production. Use package installer for trying out only. They are not good for long term production deployment. Source install and a Docker. That is what we are going to talk about today. Source install is the way to go for the production. Source install will easily let you manage your source code, will easily let you get the updates from the server, and it's the best way to deploy Udo out of the box. So source install, and of course, if you have experience with a Docker, you can always use a Docker to deploy Udo. Uh, Basically, you can scale Udo using Docker same way as if you use a source install. You'll add more Docker containers to the infrastructure to scale server, and to add more power to the server. Now, first thing, running an Udo. So that's what we are going to do. Let's look at how to run an Udo and what are different system configurations available to you. So first thing, add-ons path. Add-ons path is basically when you are running an Udo server, it's the way to tell Udo server what are the different path that you should be reading add-ons from, modules from, and those are all the modules that will be available to your server. So if you go to your source code and if you say Udo bin, that means now you are running Udo community server. And as you would see in the slide, it's running Udo from Udo using Udo community add-ons. Now, if you want to run an enterprise server, it's very simple. You say Udo bin, you say Udo path, and then you will feed the community and add-ons path, and now it's an enterprise server. And if you have a custom add-ons, or if you have Udo community add-ons, or if you have third-party add-ons that you want to use, then it's very simple. Create a directory in your source code somewhere on your file system, and just feed absolute or relative path to your add-ons path, and you're all set to go. And now you are running Udo with enterprise and your custom add-ons. So it's as simple as that. Now, of course, we are running Udo from the command line. This is not a way to go for the production. Now, For running Odoo for the production, the important thing is worker out of the box. When you start Odoo using Odoo bin command, it is a single threaded server. It is not a multi-processing server. What is multi-processing server? These days, modern infrastructure comes with a multi-core CPUs. So that means your CPU has a lot more processing power, and your software should be able to use this. And that's where the worker comes into picture. Worker is the way to tell your server to spawn n number of memory processes. Each process is called worker, and this process has ability to process parallel transaction in the memory. So that's why worker is your load balancer, and it's designed to use the modern infrastructures and use their power to give use their power and basically make best out of your money and your hardware that you have purchased. When you are using a worker, rule of thumb is number of users, number of concurrent users into 2 plus 1. That's the number of worker that you want to feed. So as you will see on the screen, I'm saying worker 3. So that means I'm starting server with 3 worker. That means at this moment I'm able to handle uh, 10 parallel users and one additional worker to manage the entire memory and everything, because we also have worker recycling. So what is worker recycling? Worker recycling is basically an option. It's a load balancer, inbuilt load balancer for the server, where when a worker is running, worker is going to use two main property of the hardware, which is time and memory. When a worker is using too much memory and too much time, that means a worker is abusing the system, and that worker will basically start being a problem for entire server and for other workers that is running in the memory. So what do we do? How do we prevent this? So for that, out of the box, Udo does come with these options, which is limit memory soft, limit memory hard, limit time CPU, limit time real, limit time real cron, and limit request. So these are different options available that you could use, uh, f- that you can configure, and this will enable server to automatically recycle the workers that is running in the memory. What is different between soft and hard limit? A soft limit is uh, where worker reaches a soft limit number, then worker will stop accepting the new request and continue working on what it's working right now. And when worker reaches the hard limit, the server will automatically recycle the worker. That means it will kill that process in the memory. Your transaction will be rolled back, and it will start a brand new worker to replace the worker that just got killed. So this is inbuilt load balancer option that comes out of the box. You don't have to do anything. You just need to find the right number that is going to work for you, and that's what you want to configure here. So now you have running server with the multi-processing capabilities. Now when you deploy Odoo in the production, the first thing that you want to do is you want to always want to use a web server, uh, third-party web server to host Odoo. And when I say third-party web server, I'm talking about Nginx or Apache or any reverse proxy mechanism. Web server can be good. By default, Odoo will run on your local area network or on your local machine using 127.0.0.0.1. Odoo server will not or should not be directly exposed to the internet. Rather, your proxy server, which is Nginx or Apache, should be doing this. And when you're using SSL option, you may see the bus exception, and when you see bus exception, enable proxy mode on your config file. As you would see, hyphen proxy mode, additional parameter added there, and that will make sure to rewrite headers in the right way. So now we have Odoo server, we have workers, and now we have proxy mode web server. So we know all the pieces that we need to have now. Next is a Postgres SQL. Of course, you are going to store most of your data into the Postgres SQL. So when you are using Postgres SQL, installing Postgres SQL, you should be always using the right source of install. Either you should use a stock install, or you should be installing source from PGDG, which is a Postgres development group, and because that's a legit and well maintained source code repository, to make sure that you are not using something additional, something unusual or unexpected. So install it from the verified sources, either stock or PGDG, as you will see on the screen. Again, very important, most common mistake that people do here is out of the box Postgres is not optimized. It's an out of the box deployment. So you must optimize your Postgres SQL when you want to go live with Odoo. And what is easiest way to PostgreSQL? Probably you are not an expert on PostgreSQL. How do you optimize it? So you go to pgtune leopard.in.ua, the link that you see in the slide, and that website will ask you some basic question. What is the CPU, memory, connection, storage, and what sort of server you have. You will feed this data and it will give you the configuration that's going to work for you. And it will help you in a great way. You will take that configuration, you will update this in a pghba.conf, and you are good to go. And if you are unable to figure this out, then probably you should have some professional here, because this is a very important piece, and usually this is the most lowest piece in the entire setup, and this will need the most attention. So you want to get the right professional, or you want to use the right technique of optimization. Next, now we have PostgreSQL. How do we connect to PostgreSQL, right? So by default, Odoo will use a unique socket to make a connection to PostgreSQL. But what if your PostgreSQL is hosted on the network or on the internet, right? How do you connect to that? So you can connect to that using this parameter, which is db host, db port, db user, db password. If you feed this data to to Odoo configurations, then Odoo will connect to that PostgreSQL. It's extremely easy setup. There is nothing complex here. One advice here: use SSL mode. Please make sure you use a secure connection. So that's why you have DB SSL mode option available as well. So make sure to use it. Most popular choices: Amazon Aurora, or somewhere onto Google PostgreSQL setup, or somewhere into Microsoft Azure PostgreSQL setup, right? So there could be many different PostgreSQL server setup available on internet, and all of that will work with Odoo. And I have seen every people using any of this, so it's just very simple setup. Now, of course, now we have Postgres Odoo. Now, which database we want to connect to? So you can say -d or -- database. That means your server will connect to that database directly. And you can use -db when you make a new database, which database you want to make copy from, if you do not want to create a brand new database from the scratch. -- no database list is a must. It's a very good option for the production. So please make sure to enable this for the production, because it will hide the list of database onto the Odoo server and to the end user. So that means anybody who is using Odoo server will not know what sort of database list you have on the server. It's a security option. So this is something that is must. Email server options. Of course, now we have everything ready to go. Now we have Odoo. Now we have PostgreSQL. They are talking to each other. Next thing your users wants to do is they want to start a communication. They want to send out an email out of the system. So when you deploy a server, of course you can go to your database and you can configure incoming and outgoing email server in your database. But what if you don't want to do this, and you want to set up some sort of default server outgoing email server parameter? Then that's where this comes into picture, where you will configure your SMTP server parameters here, and by default your Odoo server will use this as a default parameters for sending out an email. So it's very simple. You will set up an SMTP port. Of course, use SSL. Remember, use SMTP username and password that you want to use for the authentication. And if you have, of course, SSL files certificate that you want to use, then you will feed that and you're good to go. And remember, these are fallback, and this will act as a default if there is nothing configured in the database. You can always configure your email server in the database as well. Next is logging. Now this is a very important piece. Now we have operational systems, users are communicating, everything is working really good. Next thing that you want to know is what is going on my server. You need to have a log of it. If something goes wrong, you want to go back and you want to check that what was wrong at this time, what happened at this time. You want to go back and check everything, right? So how do we check that? For that, you want to enable the logging. For the production, you do not want to enable too much logging, so be careful on what you enable for the logging for the production. Usually debug or debug SQL is not advised for the production. Always remember less log is good, because it basically less IO, of course, but make sure to do not log extremely high amount of data. And remember to do log rotate. That's very important. You do not want to end up with a large log file of 10 GB or 20 GB after a month or so. So be careful. Make sure to enable log rotate. What you see on the screen is a Odoo single server multi-worker deployment. As you would see, there's a single server in the center. Then you have the request coming from the internet. Then you have the PostgreSQL, and then the file store. Because Odoo uses external file store to store a binary data or session data. So that's why there's a file store. So this is a very simple setup. Now let's take up. Now we have Odoo server running with the multi-processing, email server capabilities, logging. Everything is really good. Now we want to scale. We want to add more servers. So we want to talk about distributed or multi-server setup. So when you are doing a multi-server setup, the first thing is a shared file store. Remember, in this setup here we had a file store piece. File store should be common among all the servers. So you want to use an NFS or equivalent technology that you are experienced with, any equivalent technology that shares a file system on a network where all Odoo servers are running and file system is accessible and can do a read and write from all the server, then you are good. So you want to use any technology that is NFS or equivalent for file sharing, and it's very simple. In your config, you want to say data dir, and you want to give path to the file store where you are storing your file store. Remember to share this, otherwise you will end up with a lot of issues. Next is a shared code base or live in conflict. What does this mean? So this means all the Odoo assets that are computed usually are computed using the right date of the file. So if you are using a different version of the code base on a different server, that means different server will continuously keep computing a different asset, and they will end up in a conflict at the end of the day, and you will always see that conflict. So if you want to stay out of the conflict, make sure your all file system uses, all server uses the same code base from one source. So be careful. It's very similar to shared file store, shared code base. NFS is the way to go probably, or update them at the exact same interval so they have exact same dates and they do not end in a conflict. Next is the load balancer. Of course, you might have a high traffic system. So when you have a high traffic system, of course, you want to introduce a load balancer because you have multiple servers now. So when it comes to load balancer, you can use any load balancer where you have experience with. Our experience is working with HA proxy or Varnish. That's what we have used. We know how to work with this, but to be frank, any load balancer that you have used in the past that you have experience with, I would advise you to use that. You don't have to use HA proxy or Varnish. Just putting on the table. And of course, load balancer will let you redirect traffic to different servers, and you can have as many servers as you like. So that's the way to go. So here's a elaborate design of a multi-server, multi-tenant, multi-processing deployment of Odoo, where there's a request internet coming from the internet, and there's a load balancer. It can be any, as I said. Then you have server 1, server 2. You can have a number of server. And now, as you would see, I have also added a PG pool that is a streaming that creates a streaming replica of a Postgres SQL server in a master slave fashion or master, whatever you want to set up. That means now we have a clustered Postgres SQL setup here now, where multiple server will talking to the PG pool redirects the traffic, and you're good to go. And remember the NFS, remember the file store, it's shared again. Remember, follow the arrows and that will give you right direction. So that's a multi-server, multi-tenant, multi-processing setup. Next is extra options. So here are a few extra options that you can always use, and they are really useful. One, if you have a config file of all options that we talk about, then you want to load all the config from the config file. Then you just say -c or -config, and it will load all the configuration from a config file. But the next question for you is, how do I create a config file? What should it look like? So it is a plain text file, and you can generate one using a -s or -save option that will create an empty that will create a config file with the default options that you can go later and can modify. So you can always or you can feed everything to the command line, and you can say -c and -s, and that will store the current configuration into the config file where you want to store. Without demo, again, that's good for the production. You want to start everything without demo in the production. DB filter, if you want to hide list of database, certain database from the production onto the server, then you can hide using database filter. No database list, we already have talked about this. Transient, it's basically to vacuum database interval for the transient object. And last slide for today, there is things to watch out. So when you are deploying Odoo server, what are the things that you, let's say everything is running, we have everything going on. So what are the things that I should be worried about? So number one thing, secure deployment. Remember, everything is stored on your files. When I say deployment, I'm talking about the server security itself. So make sure to have right security set up on your server. Not everyone or randomly anyone can access the server because you're storing a lot of sensitive data over there. Set up a log rotate. Remember to set up a log rotate. Disaster recovery. Do disaster recovery. You should have a hot server or swappable server, or not, or rather I would say, and keep taking backup of your PostgreSQL as well as the files too. Use a source code deployment. As I said, use a source code deployment from a GitHub or a Docker. Do not use a package installer for the deployment. It's not a good option. Always a source deployment is a way to go. Hide database management screen --no database management. Remember that option --no DB list. That's a must for the production. And make sure your database vacuum is happening. So if you go to system settings, schedule actions, there's a schedule action called vacuum. Remember that is running every day. So make sure vacuum is happening. So those are the all options that you have when you're deploying Odoo server. Thank you everyone for joining this talk, and let's move to the Q&A.
All right, welcome back, Jigar. Thank you so much for this amazing talk about scaling up server. I'm sure it was a topic that a lot of people will be
Right.
interesting, and since it's recorded, people can watch it again.
Right.
We have a lot of questions on the chat, so let's start right away.
All right. Let's get going.
So the first question from Krisha from Silence Infotech is how to remove logger on bus exception while running Odoo.
Right. So there are ways, but the cleanest way I would say is stop the server, just flip the flag, and just restart the server. It takes less than probably 30 seconds to do this. There are ways that you can do during runtime where you will have to use a worker recycling. I have a slide on worker recycling. So you could take advantage of a worker recycling to introduce something meantime, but the cleanest way of doing this is do not do runtime.
Thank you, Jigar. Other question from Reg for Form. So for local development, 3 worker will work faster? Question mark.
So for any development, do not use worker. Use a regular multi-threading out of the box model. That's really great, because anyway you are not going to do multiple process. When you are developing, you are working on a single piece that you're working right now. So use what is out of the box. Worker is not for the, I mean, it's not advised for the production. But if you use it, will work. There's nothing that won't stop you from using it.
Other one from Han. If you run Odoo with a load balancer, do you have issue with cron thread interfering with other concurrency write issue, or do you just have one cron?
That's a really great question, and you could run into issue if you're running multiple servers of Odoo, because remember the crons are literally designed to run in the background. So your software load balancer that you are running in front of Odoo server has no influence on what crons are doing. So first, if I use a load balancer, and does it interfere with the cron? No. Basically, they are two independent pieces that are going to sit somewhere else, and they are not going to talk to each other ever. But if you're using multiple servers of Odoo, and if you have cron running exactly same time on a both server, and they try to put a lock onto a same cron, you may run into issues. So the advice situation here is, in a multiple server situation, you can also create a server without HTTP services that just runs a cron, and the HTTP server will not run the cron.
Thank you. Yeah, and I'm sorry we have so many questions. We're trying to answer as much as possible. Other question for Krisha: how can we use multiple server with different URL, with different database? Like if test Odoo DB exists, then on testodoo.com URL.
Yeah, so use canonical name. In your configuration file, you have option called, in the DB filter, you have -h and -d are two options. That is your canonical name filtering. So use the host name canonical formatting, and remember to hide database list when you use that.
Other one from Han. I tried to move the database to a different server, a different location. It's almost unusable due to ARTT. Never try it with two servers in the same.
It's very difficult to answer this question right now because I
Yeah.
really have to see what's going on to be able to say. But moving database, you have to move a database and you have to also move a file store at the same time to make sure it's going to match each other.
Let's try with some people who never asked the question. With Jose, what NFS tool do you recommend?
Right. So,
Yeah.
in my opinion, use the one that you are most comfortable with and the one that you have already experience with. Don't use the one that someone's advising. Reason being, you'll end up spending a lot of time learning something where you could use at the same time troubleshooting on the tool that you already know. So, my recommendation is use the one that you already know.
Other one from Mohammed, how to save session in database.
For that, there is nothing out of the box. Usually, it's always in a file store.
All right. I mean, thank you so much, Jigar, for that. Guys, continue to ask questions in the chat. We're trying to answer. And thank you so much, Jigar,
Sure
for your
thing.
time. And have a great day, guys.
All right. Thank you,
Thank
everyone.
you.